What's up, everybody? Welcome to Sherdog.com. I'm your man, Ant Walker, and this is episode 2 of Off the Chain, the weekly panel discussion show here with the good folks at Sherdog. So let's introduce today's panel. We're going to go first to one of the editors. He's kind of the jack of all trades here, doing photos, doing video edits, writing op-eds. Just a man who's mastered all these different crafts, Mr. Ben Duffy. Ben, what's up, my man?
It's great to be here. It's been a crazy weekend in mixed martial arts and other sports, and I can't wait to dig in.
All right. So also joining us again is the man who moderates the chaos, the confusion, the calamity of the Sherdog.com forums. That man, you know him as Jay Pettry. Jay, what's going on, my man?
How we doing? I'm excited. I'm excited for everything we're going to get to. Now, I had a heck of a weekend too, but I missed everything, so I got to come back and catch up with it. So I am so ready. Oh my God.
And today's fourth chair is from the host, founder, the man over at Mixed Combat Radio, also a photographer and videographer for Sherdog.com, Mr. Matt Hunter. Matt, how are you doing?
Well, it's truly an honor just to be here with, such legendary people like Anthony Walker, who I always tell Anthony the story. I remember how we met. I became a fan of mixed martial arts in part because of Sherdog and the old Sherdog Radio Network. So to us to sort of live on that legacy in some aspect is truly an honor and just a fantastic time to be here with you guys. Going to talk some MMA, some things that aren't MMA that unfortunately are somehow bigger than a UFC event this weekend. It's going to be crazy, but a lot to get to. Can't wait to discuss it with all of you guys.
So don't let Matt's intelligent words and his cool, calm demeanor fool you. He is a savage at heart. So I'm looking forward to displaying your savagery, Mr. Hunter. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the topics. So speaking of savagery, there was a lot of people getting punched in the face for money in different varieties. We had some Glory Kickboxing. We had some UFC going on. We have some Bellator going on. We even had Bare Knuckle Boxing. So out of all the big combat sports events this weekend, tell me, guys, which fight was the most significant in your eyes? Jay, we'll start with you.
You know, I'm going to go rogue here. UFC was good, ranked fighters, some incredible fights. And Bare Knuckle was Bare Knuckle. I'm sure we'll have a lot more to say about that later. But I'm going with Bellator. I'm going with Bellator, specifically the title fight. It was a middleweight title fight between Gegard Mousasi, who you probably heard of, Strikeforce, Dream, UFC fighter, getting upset by Rafael Lovato Jr. In a fight. I don't think anybody won. I scored that fight a draw, but I can see the argument for Lovato getting the win. But I feel like that was a huge moment because Mousasi was the ex-UFC guy that was on a 9 or 8 fight win streak. And before that, he avenged the loss he had, and he was just storming through the promotion, except for the Shlemenko fight that he kind of limped through it. And just he was going to be the guy. And Bellator was so pumped to have him there. And Lovato beat him on the scorecards. He beat him. I wouldn't say he beat him up really, but he defeated him. And that was a big deal for me because, first of all, there aren't many middleweight champs in Bellator. There have only been 5 before him, which actually is kind of funny. There have been 6 champs in light heavyweight, 6 champs in middleweight, and 6 champs at welterweight. For some reason, there aren't a ton of title fights in Bellator. Just looking at everything over, I don't know why. And you look at the names, the guys on that list, Lovato Jr. winning as an unbeaten guy. There have only been 9 other undefeated fighters in a title. So I think just the landscape of MMA changed more with that fight than the others.
Definitely a good point there. A lot of people were considering Gegard Mousasi the best middleweight in the world. I mean, there's a serious argument that he could have been UFC champion had he remained in the promotion. So definitely a lot of street cred behind what you just said there, Jay. So Matt, let's get into you. What was the biggest combat sports event or individual fight, I should say, of the weekend?
I'll cheat. I'll give 2. If that's okay. And 2 different sports. Obviously, because I come from more of a boxing side, I'm going to give a boxing answer. Tito Acosta, Angel Tito Acosta, Puerto Rican champion, WBO champion, I believe, 108 pounds, 100% knockout ratio. Guys, one of the most electrifying guys in the sport. lost to somebody that was not even a top 50 ranked opponent, in really a fight of the year contender, upset of the year contender. And honestly, the finish in the 12th and final round was highly controversial. I'll say it's probably one of the worst stoppages of the year. However, the fight itself was fantastic against Elwin Soto. Go check it out, especially I know for our audience is mainly MMA fans. Go check it out. It's on DAZN, so most MMA fans have DAZN via Bellator. It's right there via the Golden Boy, Consejo, and Machado event. Check it out. Fantastic fight. And again, Elwin Soto being a guy that's like 14-1, not even top 50, taking on Tito Costa and winning via that fashion. Absolutely fantastic. And MMA, honestly, Korean Zombie. I feel like that, unfortunately, is getting lost because of the Bare Knuckle Boxing event. But I think we're sort of forgetting that Korean Zombie was on the verge of almost like losing a legacy in a sense. Like the years away from the sport, I think had an entire generation come into it that didn't know him. You know, the post-McGregor gen, so to speak, didn't know who Korean Zombie was or is. And when he came back, he was obviously a little bit deflated, not really looking as well as his original form. And this performance was what he needed. This win is what he needed. This knockout was what he needed. And sort of reasserting himself as sort of a top 5, top 10 player in the division. I think that cannot get overlooked. Those are my two answers.
Definitely a lot of individual things that we're going to touch on there, and some of what you spoke there, Matt. But good call on that one. Korean Zombie definitely having sort of a career-defining moment. I think we can say Saturday. Of course, he's got some career left, so of course we'll see what happens next. But there's definitely a lot to that. Korean Zombie did lose a serious amount of time in the sport due to injury and due to his mandatory military service. So it's good to see him get back on track. And this is the most active he's been since I believe between the Hominick knockout and the Poirier submission, if I'm not mistaken. So, all right. So, Ben, what's your take on this? What was the most significant fight in your eyes this past weekend?
It was pretty close, but I'm actually with Jay on this one. I think Masasi Lovato was a significant fight just because anytime you have a fighter that high a level fighting outside the UFC, the stakes are incredibly high. The opportunities for fighters to break into the top 10 outside of the UFC are pretty slim. You have to do a lot. And if you left the UFC as a top 10 fighter, the opportunities to lose that standing abound because you're going to be fighting guys that, fair or not, are not as highly touted as your opponents in the UFC, and in some cases may not be as highly touted as they should be. So you can argue that Masasi left the UFC on as high a note as any fighter ever has in the modern era. He was not washed up. He was not on a losing streak. I mean, he was inarguably a top 10 guy, you know, in maybe in 2 divisions, maybe a top 5 guy in 1 division when he walked away. And he navigated the minefield really well ever since. But for him to lose to Lovato, I mean, I didn't score it round by round, but I could see it being a draw. But the thing is, it wasn't garbage. Like, Lovato imposed his will on Masasi for several long stretches, even including during the championship rounds where you would have expected Masasi to really, really take over. You know, Lovato gave it to him that last round. So, I mean, that means a lot. It means a lot for Masasi because his ways to get back into the good graces are limited. I mean, Lovato has already kind of resigned himself to there being an immediate rematch, which is kind of a bummer. But yeah, I mean, that meant more than any other individual fight on the weekend.
Yeah, you know what? I would have to agree with you on that one. That was probably, at least from the standpoint of true fans that are really watching everything and are trying to consume all this content, and they're looking at the worldwide mixed martial arts landscape and not just the UFC. The Gegard Mousasi upset loss has to be the number one most impactful to the landscape of mixed martial arts in my eyes. But here's, I see you shaking your head, Matt, and I know you'll have a lot to say on this, but I don't want to lose this train of thought, and I'm gonna jump a little bit out of order from our list of topics here because I think we're headed in a direction that needs to be talked about. So this was the main event for Bellator London, aka Bellator 223. And Matt earlier complimented the library on DAZN for a good boxing match this weekend. One thing that we can't compliment DAZN for, or Bellator, is actually showing the damn main event between Gegard Mousasi and Lovato. So please, gentlemen, what are your feelings about the uneven broadcast for Bellator London? Were you able to watch this card live? What was the experience like for you? So I'll start with you, Ben.
I did not watch any of it live. I was too busy with site stuff in the morning to jump through all the hoops that they put in front of me. And in general, to me, fights that are not going out live are an instant turnoff. I would rather wake up at 4 a.m. to watch a card in Mccall than watch it in the evening on tape delay. That's just how I am. And honestly, if you're trying to push cards in Europe, most of the people you're trying to court are probably people who would be willing to watch it at inconvenient hours. I think tape delay is the worst thing in the world. So I've caught highlights and 2 or 3 whole fights, and that's it. And that says quite a bit, because I love this sport as a fan. I have as a long time for a long time. I love Bellator's product in particular most of the time, and I cover the sport for a living. And I couldn't be bothered to go through what you had to go through to watch the Bellator card in real time, and that's not a good look.
Yeah, so Matt, I see you just itching to jump in here, but let me just say one point, and then the floor is yours, my man. Excuse me, Ben. I'm 100% with you on that. I didn't watch most of this card live. In fact, I didn't watch any of it live. I went back and tried to watch bits and pieces of it. But first of all, the DAZN interface is total trash. You can't skip through any fights. It was 6 hours worth of broadcast that you have to fast forward through manually. Hard pass on that. And then to be no mention on his own of the Gegard Mousasi and Rafael Lovato Jr. fight was amazing. It was almost as if someone had gone back in time and prevented the birth of Gegard Mousasi. That was the level of absence that there was. That name was just mysteriously missing. If you didn't know any better, Paul Daly versus Eric Silva was the main event. I even went to a highlight video on YouTube that I don't know if it was Bellator or DAZN that put this out. There were no highlights of the main event on the highlight video. So at what point do you consider accessibility, especially on a crowded weekend of fights? There was so much to choose from. I'm sorry, I pay for DAZN. I'm not gonna go through all these loops to watch something that I've already paid for. Pass on that. Matt, I know you're chomping at the bits. What do you got to say?
Well, to circle back to like the first question of like the most significant fight of the weekend, how can a fight be the most significant fight when no one watched it? You know, like that's the issue. Like I love Mousasi. I think everyone that's an MMA fan loves Gegard Mousasi. For years, for decades, he's been a hardcore darling. But it wasn't the main event. It was a untelevised post-limb. That's what the Gegard Mousasi fight was. That's at least how they treated it. Okay. So I didn't see it. I haven't seen anything of the Bellator card. The second I caught wind of, I texted Jason. I was like, "So what's the deal with the Bellator card? Like, how am I going to see Mousasi?" And he was like, "Oh, you have the Bellator app and the daily fight and the what's the other fight was going to be on DAZN, but maybe it's not the other ones. We still don't know." I was like, you know what? I can skip Bellator this weekend. I can. And unfortunately, Bellator, to go to again connect to the point of most significant fight of the weekend, Bellator, unfortunately, to me, has made itself forgettable content. And in the age of streaming on demand, and to also connect to your point, Ben, which was perfect, how do you have a tape delay event when it's the streaming era? Just make it live and it's on demand. People are going to watch it anytime, at any day, any month. It doesn't matter. It's on demand and streaming. It's always there. So like the point to make it tape delay is just so archaic that it borderlines on pure like stupidity. Honestly,
borderlines that you're being that generous.
Well, because again, I don't know whose side it is. I don't know if it's Paramount Network, which is still an archaic sort of platform.
Yeah, it has to be Paramount. It has to be
Paramount. Then I think it's just status quo. So I don't know if that's necessarily stupidity. It's just ignorance. They don't know any better because it's the same execs for Paramount that have been there for decades probably. DAZN's a new company. They should know better, and they should at least be able to flex some of their muscles on Paramount and Bellator better than this, because Mousasi Lovato, while a great fight, while a career-changing moment for maybe both guys, was not seen, was not significant because no one saw it.
All right. So Jay, if an upset occurs alongside the tree that falls in the forest, but no one is there to hear it, did that upset actually happen, Jay?
I mean, it blows my mind. Again, to echo what you guys have said, it's 2019. They have a massive streaming deal with DAZN, Danger Zone, however you want to pronounce it. I'm going with Danger Zone. They have that now. I know we don't know the contract specifics, so we don't know exactly if they have like 8 events per year. They can only have this many and they're at capacity. We have no idea. But just the idea that they're still willing to take away these fights in an effort, I don't know, of counter programming is what it seems like. They were trying to take away from the UFC main event, which started at 7, plug the Bellator fights at, what was it, 9? I think 9 p.m. for the tape delay on Paramount. Now, I know Paramount. I did a little digging, of course I did, to look ahead of time. What else are they showing? Well, they're showing marathons of the John Wick movies. They literally have a rotation of it goes John Wick 2, John Wick, John Wick 2, John Wick, John Wick 2. Seriously, that's a stretch on their channel you can look at soon. They have marathons of Bar Rescue, 2.5 Men, and some show called Mom, which I don't know what that is. That's their programming lineup. That's their programming lineup. So they're not moving content out of the way because they have something bigger to show. They're not showing Cops, which Cops, we laugh about it, but Cops traditionally has a surprisingly high ratings. Even for replays, Cops reruns will beat network shows, which I don't understand.
People put on Cops all day and just leave it on. It's back.
Maybe, but I watched a majority of the fights on this.
I'm so sorry.
Because what I like to do for my fight backs pieces, I want to make sure to see every fight, to see everything that happens. Maybe something unusual happens that you don't hear about. So I force myself to watch it, knowing, or at least thinking, I'm not going to be able to see it again, because the Bellator app has a nasty habit of clearing its previous programming history to make room for whatever Bellator Birmingham comes. I don't understand the logic of having 9 preliminary fights, 9 of them at 11:30 a.m. You can see on your phone. It's the app. It's not Bellator app as seen on Bellator.com. It is an app that you can maybe Chromecast. And then a 2.5-hour break. And there are fights still happening live in London, but we can't see them. And then at 5 p.m. they come back with three of the 8 main card fights. So there are 5 fights they put on Paramount. I know, my head hurts just talking about it.
Yeah,
there are dizzying. 5 fights on Paramount that they're not showing on the app. So I had to watch this show to see the entirety of every single fight. I had to watch it on the app. I had to watch it on DAZN later because they did upload part of the broadcast, but not all of it. I had to go on Bellator.com to see some prelims that weren't actually there because it said, here's the fight, and then it said service unavailable, so you couldn't actually watch the fights. Then you have to go to the Bellator Facebook page because they have the fights in some of their entireties there. So 4 to 5 services to watch an 18-19 fight card. No, stop it. Stop it.
Yeah, a very simple message. Bellator, get your shit together. I don't really think there's any other way to say it. Ben, what do you got on your mind, my man?
Well, I was just going to say that, I mean, Bellator gave us an exceptionally bad example of this, obviously, this past weekend, but the UFC is not innocent to this either. And it's really the same thing. Like, the UFC having moved to where you have to have ESPN Plus to buy their pay-per-views, they and Bellator both are underestimating the importance of convenience in drawing that second tier of fans to your product. And they are also underestimating the importance of inconvenience in driving them away. I mean, there's a certain small core of people that are going to seek it out no matter what, but there is that whole second tier of fans is really where they make money or don't. And I think it's the equivalent right now of just hitting those millions of people on the nose with a rolled up newspaper like a dog that you want to go away.
I would add, though, that at least the UFC is at least all contained within the ESPN umbrella.
Now it is.
Towards Bellator.com, DAZN, Paramount. That to me is that's back when UFC had like Field TV. What was it, FS1, FS2? Like it was too much.
Facebook prelims and they're kind of all over the place. But I think one thing that we can give the UFC credit for in having their one event, a singular event broken up by several different platforms, is that there was a solidarity through them all. First of all, it was live. So let's just give credit where credit's due, showing live sports, because oh man, somebody might actually want to see a sport live. So beyond the fact that it was live, it also was a seamless transition. You would watch the Facebook prelims and okay, now turn on Spike TV. You'd watch Fuel TV or FS1 and okay, now we're switching over to Big Fox. You knew that coming in. Yeah. So and then also the broadcast itself was seamless in the sense that it wasn't broken up into just random segments. Oh, and also the bout order made sense. So we were in our Slack chat during the Bellator event trying to follow our staff picks, trying to follow all this action, and the bout order was completely out of whack. It made no sense. I'm sorry, 2019 streaming services, Bellator, get your shit together. I don't really think we need to hammer this home any further. What's up, Jay?
I got one last Bellator quote. First of all, just a quick note. Bellator London, okay, Bellator London, which we had issues calling it. Bellator London was the title fight, Manhoof, and the reality TV show, Aaron Chalmers. And then Bellator 223 was Daly, Silva, and Gallagher, and Keelholtz, and that kind of thing. So
and it was the same venue, same day. Like at the same time?
They just snapped it up in half. But the thing I wanted to ask you was about a preliminary fight you might or might not have seen. Alfie Davis fought George Canella. Now, it was a very nondescript fight. Nothing special happened until George Canella is standing up and Alfie Davis is on his back. And he kicks Canella between the legs and into his backside.
He oil checked him.
And it was ruled that it was a foul, and he lost a point. He lost a point in the first kick. Now, Big John weighed in later on and said, well, it could have been a couple things because it's kind of a weird situation, that it could have been attacking the spine because you can't attack the spine.
He had to go pretty far up his ass to find his spine.
Wow, he tried.
There is also a rule in the books, but it's a specific rule. It's talking about you can't put any finger in any fighter's orifice. That's a specific unified mixed martial arts rule. So that's the finger. Now, does that apply to toes? Well, no, it's a relevant question. I know it's
because then toes going into the cage is sort of the same argument, right?
And Jessica was it Kazangano and Megan Anderson, the toe
right, toe in the eye. Wow, it's amazing the different tangents and just random bits of information that we must have some sort of awareness of as professionals in mixed martial arts. So yeah, we're talking about orifices and Big Johns, and this is a very, very strange conversation that I was not prepared to have today. We
haven't got to Bare Knuckle yet.
We haven't got to Bare Knuckle, and in fact, let's talk about Bare Knuckle once again, deviating from our course here. But all right, so Bare Knuckle Boxing possibly already peaked with Artem Lobov versus Paulie Malignaggi. Or do you see any bigger fights happening in Bare Knuckle? And before we even get into all that, who did you have winning this fight?
I didn't see it.
Yeah, I figured you. Yeah, you're the purist. So Jay, who did you have winning this fight?
I had Malignaggi taking it. I had Paulie taking the first 3 rounds. I could see an argument for Artem taking the first round, maybe, but I had it 3-2 Paulie. Now, it's kind of the fundamental question that we don't usually have to ask very often. What scores more? A guy throwing a whole bunch and missing and just coming up short? I mean, because his reach isn't exactly massive. He's not John Jones or anything. Versus a fighter dodging, playing defense, not getting hit, but not really mounting much of an effective defense. Now, that is a tough question. That it's an easy in the bare knuckle where you can easily see it rewarding action, excitement. But I had said this to some people, I can't see a way that Paulie will win the fight unless he knocks out Artem. Not in a conspiracy theory tinfoil hat, but they wouldn't let that happen. However that came out, I didn't think they would let that happen, especially because this was a $40 event. $40. That's more than their other events, unless I'm mistaken. This was not a small thing, which makes me kind of look at the bare knuckle as a sport, I guess, and wonder if it really if this is it. What are they getting? They're not getting Connor. They're not getting I couldn't imagine them getting other big deal boxers that come over, seeing what happened, seeing that a 500 MMA guy can kind of sort of beat I mean, he wasn't the best in the world, but he was a multiple time champion for a reason. So I can't see too much more. I can see it continuing on, but I gotta say this was probably BKFC's biggest night, in my opinion.
Right, I have to agree with that. They have the next main event is supposed to be Jason Knight and Leonard Garcia, and despite Jason Knight's strongest efforts to promote that fight after the main event was over, I just don't care that much. I mean,
yeah,
we'll watch it, I guess, not for $40, but we'll watch it. So we'll see what happens there. Ben, any thoughts you want to share about the bare knuckle main event? Have we lost Ben? Yep,
we might have.
Yeah, I think we lost Ben.
I guess while we're working on him, I do have a kind of a sub question.
Quickly though, Jay.
Yeah, go ahead.
I now understand the whole grotesque face that you guys were talking about with Ben in the last show. I get it now.
Anyway, okay, who are they marketing? Who are the bare knuckle promoters marketing towards? Who are they trying to get to watch it? Because this is kind of a new sport. It's re-legalized for the first time since the 1800s in the States. Now there's plenty of it in Britain and other countries, but this is making a splash in the United States. Granted, in Wyoming and Mississippi, but who's their target market? Is it us? Is it MMA fans? Is it boxing fans? Is it somebody else? Who is it?
Quite honestly, I'm not sure. Because
it's
I don't
boxing fans.
Well, yeah, but I mean, thing is, they tried to market to boxing fans with this because they framed this as a boxing versus MMA thing.
Exactly.
But that only works for this one fight, this one time. And quite honestly, I don't think there is a plan. And in something like bare knuckle boxing, I mean, do you really need much of a plan? I guess because it's going to attract what it's going to attract. This is something that isn't going to be sanctioned in the large majority of places. I was joking with someone earlier today that I don't think Andy Foster's in a rush to get a bare knuckle event sanctioned in California. I don't think Anthony Marnell has got David Feldman on speed dial. These commissions that of combat sports have not decided to jump on board with this. This is going to be stuck in your Biloxi, Alabamas, and your wherever, Florida or Dothan, Alabama, where these places that embrace sort of the chaos and less regulated nature that you'll find in say a New Jersey or a Las Vegas or California. So Matt, as a guy who is so diehard on the boxing end, give us your take. What is the boxing world in general saying about this, the results, and just the fact that this fight happened in the first place?
I would probably say that my opinion about them as in bare knuckle boxing promotions overall, my opinion of it and boxing's overall opinion of it seems to be the same, is that we view it as a grift. We view it not as a sport, as a money grab, as a cash grab. As you grab two people that are relatively known, whether they're faded boxers, faded MMA fighters, doesn't matter. They have some name value, some cachet. People pay attention to them. And we know in just the content age of 2019, if you have a name, you create views. Mm-hmm. That's just how it works. There's a reason why Chael Sonnen still does views in any medium and platform he's on, is because he's a name. And obviously these aren't the same level to that, even Paulie, but that's what they are. It's a way to sort of quickly get some money, both for the fighters and probably these promoters. And it's a grift to sort of answer Jay's point about who they're selling to, anyone. whoever they can. That's why like this one is a perfect example of that. Like they really just Paulie versus Lobov. We're gonna tap into the McGregor beef. We're gonna tap into MMA fans, boxing fans, anyone that we can sort of get money from. There is no overall marketing plan for them. Grifters don't have that. Con man don't have that, and that's what I view this as. I really give little respect to this as a sport, air quote. And I get that like some people in the MMA media industry are defending it because obviously MMA comes from roots similar to this, but MMA changed. Like we have to be honest about the fact that if MMA was still the way it was in 1993, would it be as popular? Of course not. MMA had to sanitize itself, had to become a sport, to become a ESPN property. Bare Knuckle Boxing is never going to be that because Bare Knuckle Boxing, in its sort of mission statement, in a sense, is to be unsanitized violence, and that is not sport to me. That's not meritocracy. I get that they have some sort of championships thing going on, but air quotes, and I view this as a complete grift and con. Let them grift and con. This is a free market. It's capitalism. Whatever. It's not socialism. It's capitalism until Bernie gets elected. What up? It's going to be what it is. And I think MMA fans hopefully are getting smarter to the fact. I think to your point, Jay and Ant, that when we get Jason Knight versus Leonard Garcia, who the last time was relevant in 2011, 12?
Been a while.
Hopefully we as a community can reject that because that's not good at all. Like at least Paulie and Lobov was like had some animosity and some beef, and like as a basis human emotion we understand conflict, so we bought into that. But everything else is a con. I'm not going to watch it. I'm not going to spend money on it. If you have streams though, Matt Hunter MCR, all platforms.
As far as I agree with it being a grift and a con, but I will say that there is some sporting integrity to this to an extent, just by the nature of it continuing to happen. I see a clear change in the way a lot of these guys are fighting now, Saturday night, as they did in some of the earlier bare knuckle events.
Definitely.
Like, so there is just by the nature of it continuing some sort of evolution. Keep in mind that mixed martial arts went through a very similar thing when it was still considered human cockfighting. There were people like a Bas Rutten that were trying to cross train. There were the Frank Shamrocks and that were trying to innovate in the techniques of that sport, even if the rest of the world considered it to be just needless brutality. So I think in that sense, there will be some evolution. Whether that evolution happens fast enough or is dramatic enough to create some sort of mainstream acceptance is an entirely different conversation. And then also the aversion to blood, despite the fact that it means nothing for the actual blunt force trauma and head concussions and whatnot. So Ben, any thoughts you have on this one, since you jumped out for a moment there? Thank you for rejoining.
I apologize. It's been really stormy here in Houston, and my internet was out, as was my power for big chunks of the day. So I am via phone tether right now. It sounds like we're still talking about Bare Knuckle 6.
Yes, Matt wanted to keep talking about it.
It's his favorite event this weekend.
Easily. Thank you, Jay.
I mean, Paulie Malignaggi is clearly the biggest loser of the weekend. And I don't mean that in the, oh, what a loser, but in terms of what he lost in terms of achievement and opportunity. I mean, he lost to an average MMA fighter in a terrible fight. If he'd lost in a barn burner, he might at least have gotten a return call to this promotion. If he'd beaten Lobov and cut an insane heel promo in the ring afterwards, he might be picking up the biggest paycheck of his career within the next 12 months because Conor McGregor wouldn't be able to ignore that. Instead, he's like a black hole, like sucking everything in. He hurt his own stock. He hurt Bare Knuckle because, I mean, he was, when he walked into that ring, the most credible mainstream boxer to try this out in terms of what he achieved in his career and how close he was to his prime. And any other boxer that was even kind of thinking about this is like, oh, hell no now. I mean, they saw how the decision went. And Paulie has no one to blame but himself for that. I mean, he tried to be a slickster in a promotion where in the previous event, the promoter literally threatened to take a guy's purse away for not just standing and swinging. Like, being Paulie was the worst thing he could have done in the ring, and he did it anyway. He's got no one to blame but himself. But yeah, like, I think this is not the beginning of the end. They can keep putting on events for as long as they want, but it's the beginning of the end of me having to talk about them in order to cover mixed martial arts as a journalist.
I have one really quick follow-up question about Paulie. Okay, now Florida doesn't disclose salaries, so we don't really know. But we've heard reports that Paulie broke 7 figures in this payday to take this. Buy or sell? Do you think he made over $1 million?
No.
Yes.
I can believe that.
Yes.
Because the level of interest that this generated was absurd. I mean, there were mainstream media outlets who decided not to send any personnel to Greenville, South Carolina for a top contender featherweight fight. There were mainstream media outlets that decided not to send anybody to London to watch, one of the greatest middleweights alive right now in a main event or in a main event.
No,
in a post-slim, I should say. But they sent them to Bare Knuckle Boxing. There was a tremendous amount of interest in this, a tremendous amount of traffic. If you look at some of the outlets that sent personnel there, the numbers are through the roof as to the amount of attention this garnered, and this is motivating some sort of like just visceral primal rage or something out of people. Just they care. And that's really what it's all about. People cared, so they watched it, so they put money down. And I'm sure Paulie isn't exactly a guy who's hurting for money, at least from my estimation. He's been a long-time analyst and commentator for Showtime. He made a good amount of money during his boxing career as well. And, granted, I don't know him personally, but he doesn't strike me as the guy who's recklessly spending and acting a fool with said money. He's a guy who typically approaches things in an intelligent manner, except for his ill-advised media tours about the sparring session.
And his haircuts.
Yes. And that one time he came out to the ring in like the executioner robe or whatever that was. So yeah, man, I would assume that Paulie was not a cheap guy in this one. They had to lay down a significant flat fee, and they had to say, hey, you're going to get this cut of the pay-per-view. It had to be done.
And on top of that, I know for MMA it's not the same, but in boxing, making 7 figures isn't a rarity. It is,
but this is bare knuckle.
It is, but Paulie is a boxer. Like, you have to put in that context. Paulie is, whether he's retired or not, he's still a boxer. And in today's age where the average budget is thousands of times more combined than it was previously. In 2014, the combined boxing budget for HBO and Showtime was $60 million. Now, individual promoters have double that while they're streaming and network deals. So Paulie, if he wanted to have a fight, he could go to boxing, make 7 figures. He has that name cachet. The zone would gladly have that, right? Like, other people would gladly have a Paulie fight. And he still relatively was fighting recent. He had the Sam Eggington fight, I want to say in 2016-ish. And I think Bare Knuckle, there's no way they could have any leverage to sort of argue against what Paulie was asking for. And knowing Paulie came from boxing, was asking for 7 figures, guaranteed.
Well, there's a really quick stat. On the forum, the biggest event of all the events going on between UFC and Bellator and Glory and Bare Knuckle was Bare Knuckle by far. There were something like 4 or 5 times the amount of viewers for that one than any of the rest. It was shocking. It was shocking.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me too much because you're tapping into a lot of things that people seem to respond to. First of all, the McGregor angle is obviously the one thing that always gets clicks, always gets views. You mention the name Conor McGregor, people start paying attention. So there's that angle. Also, once again, the boxing versus MMA thing, which despite the fact that we settled this debate at UFC 1, people are still talking about this. People are still curious, no matter how many times James Toney gets taken down by Randy Couture or how many times a Floyd will outbox Conor McGregor. Like we still seem to respond to this sport versus sport debate and which style is better. So that doesn't shock me that so much attention was brought to this.
I want to sort of specify your comment there. I want to say it's MMA fans that are still reacting to the boxing versus MMA angle. And I forget who said it on Twitter. Maybe it was like Aaron Bronstetter or somebody of that nature made the point of like boxing. MMA fans have this inferiority complex to boxing. Like we're the little brother to boxing, and that still played out. Like Paulie versus Lobov is a perfect example of that because, in large aspect, the MMA fandom or community was tapped into it, but the boxing community wasn't. And I think that's in large part due to MMA fans having this little brother complex to boxing. They're the new kid on the block still, and
that fight doesn't prove anything.
It doesn't, but it motivates casuals. And even MMA fans, I think, are aware of how silly it all is at this point. And if you were doubting it all, I think Conor versus Floyd should have shown this, that this is a really stupid argument to continue having. But if you are a casual fan, meaning you are stupid as far as your fight knowledge goes, or your appreciation of fight knowledge, yeah, this is still something to talk about. So yeah, there are a lot of stupid people out there. There are a lot of people who are, and if they're not stupid, they're ignorant to what the world of combat sports has to offer as far as quality matchmaking and relevant fights. So you put together a circus sideshow, people go to the circus, and that I think that's kind of weird it is.
I don't think many casuals really tuned in, though. Let's be honest. The buy rate was what? Like, the internet imprint for this was huge, obviously, but what did that actually turn into people buying it? Because I saw videos online of this on the press conference, whatever, but that doesn't mean I bought the event. I didn't.
Well, I know it was an easy event to pirate. Yes. And before the FBI comes knocking on my door, hey, I paid, okay? I pulled up my credit card. Hey, it's a wrap. So I'm good. Don't even come knocking on my door about that. But I do know that there was a wide availability of very high quality streams. So of course you have to take that into account as well. But a lot of people made a lot of money off this, whether it be the promoters, whether it be the fighters, whether it be the media outlets that are covering it and getting paid from the ad dollars on the clicks. A lot of money was generated from this fight, and a lot of it didn't come from people who actually know anything about fights.
But bring it back to the point of like how long can bare knuckle last to bring about that evolution you talk about that I just don't see. You have to be a successful business. And right now they have 0 network deals, 0 streaming deals. It's purely a pay-per-view model right now. Are they making money? Especially when they're paying Paulie Malignaggi 7 figures. Anthony Johnson's getting a like whatever administration,
a bodyguard check or something. Yeah,
that's what he's doing. God bless them for getting a paycheck. But what is he doing? Like, you know, like I again, it's a grift. So to think that grifters are above board and making money, I don't see that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a question about their long-term sustainability from a financial standpoint. But my comment on the evolution of it is from a pure technique thing. Now, that technique the evolution may not happen fast enough for anybody outside of a select group of knuckleheads to appreciate it. And the promotion could very well shut its doors next week, and said evolution is dead in the water. That is possible. Maybe another bare knuckle promoter picks up where that left off. We don't know. But as far as the technical aspects of it go, there is some sort of change from event to event of the quality of the fights or the type of fights that are being fought, the way they're approaching and attacking their opponents, especially from the guys who have done it before, the guys who go in there for the second and third time. They don't fight the same as they did the first time. So all right, so let's not beat this horse any further into death. Let's not beat it into the living death that Shamrock wants to impose on Ortiz, and let's move on here. We'll talk about a fight that definitely was legitimate, and that was Korean Zombie knocking out Renato Moicano. Of course, we can go on and on about Korean Zombie, and I'm sure we'll get there at some point during this discussion. But let's talk about Renato Moicano. I mean, he started off his career at 11-0 and 1. And since then, he's lost 3 of his last 5 by finish, and that obviously not a good look. But what do you think the future holds for him after getting slept by KZ last Saturday. Jay, we'll start with you.
Well, I admit when I first saw it, I had moved to Hot Take City. I thought that's it. That's probably a wrap for Moicano. He's been finished pretty brutally in his last 2 fights. It's just not going to look good for him. And then I stopped, of course, and looked to see, okay, wait a second. In his last 5 fights, he's fought Korean Zombie, okay, top 10-ish guy. Jose Aldo, I've heard he's pretty good. I read that on the internet one time. He wasn't bad. Cub Swanson, which he's still a fringe top 10 guy these days. Calvin Kattar, who is criminally underappreciated, and Brian Ortega, who I think I give him that fight until he kind of fell into that guillotine. But the point is all those guys that he's fought in his last 5 were top 10 or top 5 or maybe fringe top 15-ish, I guess you could say. So it's hard to say that his goose is cooked after a few losses, a few stoppage losses like that to great guys. But at the same time, who is his best win throughout his career? Because you look at all the losses and the stoppages. I mean, beating Calvin Kattar, which looks better now that Kattar has performed better, or tapping out Cub Swanson. Before that, his split decision over Jeremy Stevenson will put him on the map. But I don't feel he has that marquee win to keep him in the top 5, which I think he was ranked top 5. He was the 5th ranked UFC featherweight, which means he's number 6 because the champion. But essentially, he was a top 5 guy. We had him ranked as number 6. And to lose to a top 12, top 14 guy in Korean Zombie, he's always going to be there. But to be honest, hasn't fought a lot. He's fought 3 times since 2017. And before then, he was away for a while. He had stuff to take care of, we'll put it that way. But Moicano is still young. He's 30. He's 30 years old. And he's training at ATT hard. So and he's only been there a year or 2. So I can't write him off yet. But he really needs a win to keep him in contention. Otherwise, he's going to fall hard. Losing by knockout in 60 seconds to Zombie is that stinks for his career. But it isn't over yet. But at the same last bit of time, he doesn't have a lot of good options to keep him in contention that he hasn't already fought. So maybe Shane Burgos, who just beat Swanson, maybe somebody from the Emmett Mirsad Bektic fight. But there aren't a lot of options to keep him relevant and still keep him in the top of the division to get a win. So he's at a real crossroads, I think, is my final answer.
All right, Ben. What's your take before the Houston weather hates on you again?
Sorry,
it's all good.
This is going to sound terrible, but I think Moicano is just another guy at this point. I mean, just another guy in the top 10 of a very good division, but I think he may have hit his peak. I mean, his last 2 fights have revealed some serious holes in his striking fundamentals. And even the loss to Ortega, I mean, yes, he got guillotined, but he got guillotined because Ortega was chewing him up on the feet. He was tired, getting dinged up, and he shot the worst single leg in the world on one of the nastiest finishers in the entire sport. Like, the fight ended in the guillotine, but it was lost on the feet. And in much the same way that the top 5 to 6 of the welterweight division is really cruel if you can't wrestle, the top 5 or 6 of the featherweight division, if you're not a solid fundamental striker, it is completely full of guys who are going to make you pay for it. If you back straight up, if you don't get your hands up, Max Holloway, Ortega, Jose Aldo are going to make you pay. Moicano can change that. I mean, I agree with Jay that Moicano is 30. I disagree with Jay that is young for a featherweight. I mean, I'm trying to think of featherweights who improved substantially after age 30, and I'm drawing a blank. So Moicano's going to be around for the next 4 or 5 years. He's going to be in the top 10. I mean, if you look at his last 10 fights, he's lost to all the top 5 guys, and he's beaten all the number 6 through 12 guys. He is ranked exactly where he should be, kind of in the middle of the top 10.
All right, Matt, what do you think?
I see a lot of what both Ben and Jay are saying. I think Moicano is not done. I won't go that far, especially because he's only lost to, 3 of some of the best featherweights we've seen in the last decade, honestly. Brian Ortega, Korean Zombie, Jose Aldo. Like, those are phenomenal fighters, and you lose to them. That just means you're not the best guy. That's all that means to me. So that he's clearly not the best guy. I definitely agree with Ben that his striking fundamentals just aren't there. The amount of times he will just drop hands when he leaves combinations, sort of leaves engagements. It's criminal the times he does it. Like, his striking coach needs to be hitting him upside the head with the mitts every time he drops his hands, because he's doing it a lot. Like when he pulls like a 1-2, he won't pull the one back to defend himself when he throws the 2. Like, simple stuff like that. I think 30 is borderline. I do agree with Ben on that point, that 30 at this, especially in this weight range in MMA, is one of those where if you're not on point, you might be in danger of slipping. But then again, we've also seen guys sustain themselves for very long times. Cub Swanson, for example, has still been a borderline top 15 guy, top 10 guy forever, and he's in his mid-30s. So it is possible. You just have to be really talented. And I think there is a little bit of a question mark about Death Moicano. He is talented. How talented is he? How much of a ceiling does he have? How high is his basement, so to speak? Those are still questions that have to be answered, because he's still relatively as a young fighter in terms of fights. He doesn't have a ton of fights to look at in terms of a case study, sample size. So I just need to see more from him. I would love like a Darren Elkins fight for him, somebody that isn't necessarily going to outstrike him, but is still a top 15, top 20 guy that could give him some trouble. And he does need a soft touch. Like, I know this is not the norm for MMA as a whole, but guys do need tune-ups, and 2 TKOs back-to-back against top competition, take a tune-up. And a Darren Elkins type is the perfect tune-up for him. That is still a, quote, elite guy, top 15, top 20 in the world.
Yeah, I'm feeling what everyone's saying here, but I think something is getting lost in translation here. I think this is more about how good Korean Zombie is. Renato Moicano has proven himself to be among the elite in the division. Korean Zombie's just better. He's just a better fighter. And I think that's something that we tend to forget. We think about Korean Zombie, we think about the brawl with Leonard Garcia in WEC. We think about, how crazy that twisted submission was. We'll think about all these like wild moments of his. But in a lot of those wild moments, we see a lot of technical improvement every time out. That makes you think like, man, what if he was still around? What if he didn't have to do that military service? What would his career look like? Matt, you brought up a good point when I tweeted something about this during the event or right after the event. You're saying, what would have a Korean Zombie versus 145 McGregor fight look like? There were a lot of possibilities that were left on the table. Korean Zombie versus Frankie Edgar. Like, there are a lot of possibilities on the table that amount to a lot of good action, that we could see these jumps in his skill. I think that is probably the biggest takeaway for me. I'm not ready to take Moicano out to pasture. Yes, he is 30 years old and in the featherweight division, and that is when it's kind of like, all right, you got to do it, or you got to do it now, or it's never. And that is something that needs to be acknowledged. But if the guys you're losing to are Brian Ortega, Aldo, and Chan Sung Jung, I'm sorry, I can't just write you off with any level of speed. So I want to see one more for him, and then maybe I'll have a more definitive answer that's about him and not so much his opponent.
Frankie Edgar's 37 now. I mean, he might be exception, not the rule, but since coming down to featherweight, he's looked pretty exceptional outside of Jose Aldo and Brian Ortega booping him. So I get your point about the age being a factor, but Korean Zombie's 32, but he took a lot of time off, so he didn't have the mileage. But to what you said, Ant, it is a really good point that Zombie has looked stellar since coming back. He's starched Dennis Bermudez. He was literally 1 second away from beating Yair Rodriguez before the no-look elbow happened, the 1 in a million type of knockout, and he smoked Moicano. And before that, the Aldo fight, it was before he took some time off. But he also put Dustin Poirier to sleep. And so he's the kind of guy who, he's a threat to anybody in the division, very possibly.
Yeah, we tend to forget that this guy went to college for MMA. Like, he has a degree in mixed martial arts. He's a technical wizard that I think his aggression and his love of a good scrap seem to detract from what he's able to do from a strategic standpoint when he's firing on all cylinders. All right, so let's move on from this one, and we're gonna talk about very briefly what happened at the Contender Series last week. We aired like right before the show, so I was like, man, it's too bad that we did the show already, because I so wanted to talk about it. And then of course the live feed on the trenches crapped out, so Jason and I did record a segment for that on the Sherdog.com YouTube page, so check that out. But anyway, let's get into it. Did the Contender Series get off on the wrong foot this season? The decision not to sign Brendan Loughnane due to an ill-advised takedown attempt in his fight. Do you think that do you think that confirms that Dana White has gone in full just bleed mode? Matt, I'm gonna start with you.
Well, quickly, I think you mischaracterized it. Like, ill-advised for who? Like, it won in the fight. It was well-advised. Like, it's ill-advised because Dana White, who sort of occasionally wants to be a promoter and play promoter whenever he feels like it, decided, that was kind of boring. I'm not going to give you the contract. So that's the only reason why I was ill-advised. It was a well-advised takedown attempt or takedown. I think to get off on the wrong foot for the Contender Series, yes or no, I think that has a certain audience that's always going to be watching it. And that audience is not going to go away because of this, let's be honest. On top of that, I think this is one of those instances where it's just a reaffirmation of what Dana White is and what we know him to be, and not really anything new. And this story is going to go away in T-minus 24 hours, and we're going to move on. And we're going to find out the next story of Dana White acting kind of sleazy and not being the greatest promoter, because there's plenty of them and they happen every other week. So I don't know if this is really going to be an issue for the Contender Series. It probably isn't. It's just another long line of stories about Dana White being Dana White.
All right, Jay, what about you, man?
It is really, truly one of those moments that just you have to stop and shake your head. To those that didn't see it in its entirety, when the Loughnane was fighting Bill Aljo, and it was a good fight. It was a bloody brawl back and forth, and with 10 seconds left, Loughnane, instead of with Aljo on the ropes, he shot for a takedown, and at the end of the fight, they showed a replay of the camera watching Dana White, and I think it was Sean Shelby sitting next to him, or was Mick Maynard sitting next to him. Somebody was sitting next to him at the time, and you just see Dana, just a disappointed father looking, just going, "Oh, if only," as if that was it. That was the thing that shut him down, and then he went ahead and said it. It to me, I had the same reaction internally as I did with going just briefly to Bare Knuckle, the previous event where the promoter got on the microphone and said, "We're taking half of your purse for being boring." It was just a knee-jerk reaction that backfired. Now, it may not make as big of a story as it should, because, Loughnane's a legit guy who probably should have been signed a long time ago. Then he had to fight an ACB for a while, or whatever. ACA, I think, is what it's called now. But I think the bigger story that hasn't gotten much coverage is that for the first event last week, a guy missed weight and the fight was canceled. So they had to go ahead with 4 fights. Now, first of all, that's never happened. A fighter had never missed weight. So technically, no fighter had still missed weight because it was canceled before the event happened. And then today, a guy misses weight by 7 or 8 pounds. So this is something to keep your eye on. The first 2 seasons, guys were guys and girls were of the utmost professionalism, and I don't know what has happened. I don't know what's in the water, but we've already had 2 fighters in 2 events miss weight for the biggest audition of the career, where they have to do basically 2 things: make the weight they're supposed to make and have a good fight. And it's very surprising to me. And I could see Dana seeing that and doing his head shake and going, well, say the guy who's fighting tomorrow that missed weight wins by a spectacular knockout, a flying knee, sensational minute, whatever, that he won't get signed because he disappointed Dana. And that's a tough thing to do.
All right, Ben, what's your take?
I'm a huge proponent of the Contender Series in general. Obviously, that was a really It was not a good look. It was a disappointing moment. I'm not ready to write it off entirely because regardless of how you feel about Dana White on the whole in his long tenure now as essentially the figurehead of the sport, one thing that you can agree on is that he is an emotional and frankly kind of capricious guy. Like, he shoots from the hip. He has always shot from the hip. If you like him, you find it endearing. If you don't like him, you find it one of the worst things about him. I need to see a couple more episodes before I'm ready to make any real sweeping judgments about the future of the series based on that. Because, yeah, it was terrible. Because the thing is, it wasn't a bad fight. It was a good fight all the way through. And, I mean, that last 10 or 15 seconds, he was probably a lot of fans sitting at home on their couches went, oh, come on. Just, he did it with cameras on him. And the fact that he is, I mean, he is a mogul in the sport with the emotional mindset of a casual fan at times is kind of what makes him Dana White. You know, the camera was on, he did what he did. Again, I'll have to see kind of how he acts and reacts and where the contracts are handed out on the next few episodes. But I think it'll just end up being kind of a forgettable speed bump, you know, a few weeks from now.
And quick, let me jump in. I think the Contender Series also is, to Ben's credit, or Ben's point, like, is a great vehicle. Like, I love it so much more than the Ultimate Fighter. Like, I feel like that needs to be stated every time we talk about the Contender Series, that this is a great platform, great vehicle. Let's do this more, invest more money into this than the Ultimate Fighter, any of that show, because it's just more bare bones. It's to the fights, and plus we've gotten some good fighters from it. Like, Kevin Holland is turning himself into a pretty decent, like, top 20 competitor. So we do get some decent competition and fighters from this series thus far. So I'm all in favor of it, even with that sort of speed bump and controversial moment.
Yeah, last week we were singing the praises of the Dana White Contender Series. So I guess it's now officially called the Contender Series as opposed to the Tuesday Night Contender Series.
But they dropped Tuesday night.
Yeah, but now the hashtag DWTNCS, I'm just still using that because it's pre-programmed in my phone. So there that is. But anyway, we were singing the praises of this promotion for a reason. It's an excellent product. It's but I think also something that we need to acknowledge. This is something that is aimed at hardcore fans. So to take a casual fan sensibility into it, it's kind of strange for me. Like, I think it's ridiculous that he didn't sign him, but at the end of the day, you know, Dana White's name is on the title of the company. So, you know, if it's the Benjamin Duffy Contender Series, I'm sure then
Antonina Shevchenko is not in the UFC right now.
Right, and there are a lot of decisions that that we will be making that Dana wouldn't.
And Greg Hardy is not in the UFC right now.
Oh,
I mean, Juan Adams can still go kick his ass somewhere, but yeah, if it was Ben Duffy's Contender Series, whole different look.
Yeah, so yeah, of course there are things that we'd be doing a lot different if we were in charge, but we're not. And I don't like framing it this way because the man got snubbed very publicly, very unfairly, if you ask me. But at least the overall community is on his side. At least some of these other promotions that apparently he turned down, hoping for a UFC spot, are re-ringing his phone, and he's thinking about, yeah, maybe the move to Bellator is good if they air my fight on the zone with the rest of the card, or maybe. Maybe what's up with Rise and New Year's Eve, like something where you're going to get a payday on a high level.
PFL.
Yes.
PFL, I think is good with.
Well, they're in the middle of their season now, so maybe for the next go round. So yeah, Brendan Loughnane will be fine. He'll be just fine, and the world will continue moving on. One thing that will not be moving on though are the bantamweight and the flyweight divisions, because the newest champ Henry Cejudo has now been benched for the rest of the year after undergoing a shoulder surgery. So now what does the UFC do with both of these titles? Matt, I'll start with you.
Nothing, hopefully. Like, just do nothing. Just have fights. Henry Cejudo's going to be out for the year. That's fine. Have title fights in the beginning of 2020. Like, I don't want interim title fights. Like, just have Benavidez fight for Miga this week. Maybe sit Benavidez on the side to give him a check, make him happy. Have Benavidez versus Cejudo at the flyweight division beginning first quarter of 2020. Make Aljamain Sterling versus Peter Yan. Fuck it, why not? In the meantime, and then the winner of that fight the winner, obviously, of Cejudo, or if Cejudo doesn't win, you have to fight Cejudo in second quarter of 2020. And that's what you do. That's what I would do. I don't think you can really add a interim title fight to like Aljamain Sterling versus anyone, Benavidez versus anyone. Like, it just doesn't make sense. That would be egregious. Like, I know like UFC loves interim belts, but that would just seem like a bridge too far for them, in my mind.
All right. I honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw an Aljamain versus Dominic Cruz interim title fight whenever he's ready to come back. And not to say that should happen, but would you be shocked by that?
But what's Cruz's timetable? Isn't he out for the rest of the year?
Yes.
I think he said he'll be ready in December, if I'm not mistaken.
So I don't think they make a Aljamain Sterling Dominic Cruz fight, interim fight in December, and have Cejudo fight the winner in March, or like that just makes no sense.
Stranger things have happened. Much stranger things have happened. We had an interim title fight for the welterweight belt when the champion Tyron Woodley was ready to come back to fight the next month, or a month and a half later.
The UFC, or I should say Dana White, does not like Tyron Woodley. They like Cejudo. So like there is a difference there.
Interesting that you would use the phrase "to be fair." Jay, what do you think, my man?
They're in a really strange situation because any other time a simultaneous two-division champion will be injured, you think that'd be kind of, and not just injured, sidelined for 6 months or more. I think that'd be a catastrophe because the divisions need to keep going. There aren't many examples, but look back to World Series of Fighting when David Branch was the light heavyweight and middleweight champion and went back and forth and defended, and then the UFC scooped him. But at the same time, there aren't in the UFC. I mean, I kind of raised this last week when I was talking about double champs. Conor vacated both of his belts before defending one. Cormier was the light heavyweight champ, defended it, won the heavyweight strap, and defended that, but he never defended the light heavyweight while he was the heavyweight champ, so he let that one go. Amanda Nunes is fighting Holly Holm in 2 weeks. And then maybe she'll fight featherweight. Maybe she'll fight, I don't know, the winner of somebody. Maybe she'll fight Felicia Spencer. Maybe she'll have a Cyborg rematch. I don't know. None of them really sound good. But it makes me wonder if they're ever going to have the two-division champion ever successfully defend or ever even attempt to defend both of their belts when they're holding them. That all said, this is probably the best time for Cejudo to be injured as the champion of flyweight and bantamweight, because the bantamweight division doesn't really have a clear number 2 guy to speak of. They have Moraes is in there, but he just lost, obviously. Aljamain Sterling, arguable that he could deserve the next shot, but it's still hard to say. Peter Yan also put himself on the map. Assunção, no way. Then you got Pedro Munoz, Dominic Cruz, so that there isn't the top fight. So there isn't the next contender in line. So that's the kind of thing where they can take this time, figure out what they're going to do with the division, and keep it going on, and bring back what they used to have this. To a lot of people who don't remember, the UFC used to have official title eliminator bouts where the winner, it is in effect what we now have as the interim championship, where the winner of that fight will fight for the title next. Chael Sonnen versus Nate Marquardt was one such example, where this was the official title eliminator fight, where the winner of that fight would fight for the belt. So that kind of situation could be better suited. I used to hate interim belts, but at the same time, I warmed to them because the fighters in the interim belts are effectively having a number 1 contender fight, but their salary is substantially more because most of them have champions clauses in their contracts. So they're essentially fighting number 1 contender fights, but they're also getting paid 2x, 3x, 4x, maybe even 4 times more. So that kind of makes me feel better. Tony Ferguson, Kevin Lee, a fight that was already important, they each got paid a couple $100,000. That's even better. So this is okay for the divisions. They'll be just fine as long as they actually realize, okay, let's just keep it going, and he'll be back.
All right, Ben, what's your take on this, man?
The best possible thing to do would be to leave interim title fights off the table. I mean, they're really not appropriate if you know when the champion is likely to come back and there's kind of a projected timetable for it. Having said that, of course, they're going to award a couple. I mean, we will probably have. Oh no, I mean seriously, like we can run this segment back, but by the end of this year, do you not think that there will probably be interim champs in both of those divisions? Probably. But whether they do it through de facto title eliminators or actual interim title fights, just get the order of contention sorted out in both of those divisions and have them ready for Cejudo when he comes back. And for goodness sake, make him shut up with the Lomachenko talk.
Yeah, that I definitely wanted to hit on that one.
Hey guys, Lomachenko has been doing some Muay Thai training, so
is that what you call it? Is that what you call it?
Sorry, Muay Thai training.
Yeah. The less we talk about this, the better, because I'm almost afraid that we're gonna talk these things into existence. I saw talk about Conor versus Floyd 2 and Bare Knuckle, and somebody tweeted that out just for fun.
$100 to watch it.
I mean, but granted, as much as we're ready to just take a crap all over those matches, I am so reaching for my wallet in anticipation to throw my credit card at whoever so I can watch all of the foolishness. Man, I am a complete moron. All right, so let's move on from this, and we're gonna talk about Sean O'Malley, who has been the latest person to quote unquote pulse for a banned substance. So Ostarine, which is something that came up in the news several months back, where it seemed like a string of fighters were getting popped for it, including O'Malley. He just got pulled from UFC 239. And now, in hindsight, seeing someone else pulse, does this make the John Jones saga more believable in your eyes? Ben, what do you think?
Well, I mean, pulse is kind of an excuse or a justification thrown on afterwards. I mean, he didn't pulse, he tested for a small amount. You know, pulse is what the apologists of John Jones came up with when he tested for a small amount of a substance that he had previously tested for a large amount of. Like, I'm not just going to roll over and let this become part of our lexicon. All I want to know is, what does he have in his system? And is it a therapeutically a significant amount? I don't want to hear fancy names put on it. I don't want to hear excuses. Just tell me what he did and what you're going to do about it. So I reject this entire conversation. Like, if the amount that's in his system is those proverbial picograms, then let him fucking fight. Or don't even tell me about it.
So because you're so resistant to this conversation, I'm going to ask you another question, Ben. So do you think do you better if the regulators just didn't mention this, if USADA just kind of kept it quiet whenever one of these incidents happened?
The new policy where fighters just disappear from fights, and then, you know, a few days or weeks later, like, yeah, that's because USADA like binged me, is just completely bizarre. And again, I'm coming at this from the viewpoint of somebody who thinks a lot of these substances should be legal out of competition. You know, like, steroids in general reduce inflammation, make it easier and quicker to come back from injuries. You know, the general result of steroids in training camps is not everybody looking like Bohachinia. It's just fewer injury withdrawals from fights. You know, but I mean, if we're going to have the rules as they are, I just want to know what you have in your system, you know, whether it is a clinically significant amount and what the rules say about it.
All right, Jay. So going to you on this one. So I'm personally kind of encouraged in a way because I'm seeing some sort of acknowledgement of not understanding the science and kind of taking a wait and see approach because apparently O'Malley isn't quite the same situation that John Jones, at least from a regulatory standpoint. It's just that they're not going to license him pending a hearing. So Jay, do you think this is a positive that we're trending toward more scientific breakthroughs with PDDs? Did I say PDDs?
PEDs, PBDs, whatever you want to call them.
Boys to Men, ABC, BVD.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
The East Coast family.
Substance.
Right.
You know, when the drug testing czar, as they are apt to call him, will go up and have a scrum in front of a bunch of reporters and people that want to know the answers to these questions and look them straight in the eye and say, you know, we really just don't quite understand the science behind it. It really gives me pause. Now, unfortunately, I have to disagree with my colleague, Mr. Duffy, on one major point. I really prefer fighters getting quietly pulled from events, and then it'll come out later if the fighter chooses to say it or after it goes through, because these fighters need to have due process to contest or evaluate or appeal or investigate these findings before they're instantly labeled a cheater, because legal standpoint, it harms their reputation. They get branded as a cheater, and their name is associated with that brand forever. I mean, you think of some fighters that have tested positive once or maybe tested positive once and it's over. Yoel Romero tested positive and he was kind of vindicated, but people still think of him as a steroid user. Now, what I really want the most of this whole Sean O'Malley situation is for them to go back and immediately heavily test and investigate Nico Montano, Augusto Mendez, and Marvin Vittori, because they all had the same exact situation with contaminated supplements containing ostarine. And they were all reduced when they found this was a very small window of results. They all came out at the same time that said that they all took these substances or these supplements, didn't know they had anything in them, and found there was no evidence of wrongdoing or intentionally taking these banned substances. Now, if O'Malley is going to pulse, which I also hate the term, if he is going to test positive for trace amounts, Nico, Augusto, Marvin should all test positive too. And if they don't, we have a real problem with the system and something we need to find out. Biology notwithstanding, people break down things differently. Generally speaking, if they all tested positive for the same substance around the same time, they should all have trace amounts in their system. That's about the most chemistry knowledge I can muster right now. But there needs to be more consistency. This might be putting us on the right track, but we have to know. If they're going to make us know all these things, they really need to let us know.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Matt, as someone who obviously is rage-filled and roided to the gills, what is your take on this?
I agree with a lot of what both Jay and Ben say. I agree with Jay in the aspect of like I like the current mode of releasing information. I think there's a benefit to that. I think the old mode of just, hey, this guy's popped, and then go through the due process was really harmful to fighters. And I'm of the mindset of Ben of like, hey, look, there's a lot within the WADA code that it needs reexamination.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a Dutch study that came out. I remember Paul Demio, professor of University of Stirling, made note of it at the Sports Integrity website. And basically, of the 23, codes or substances within the code, or categories of substances within the code, only about 11 or 12 of them have concrete medical evidence that they are performance enhancing. That's half the WADA code is questionable. Half the substances on that shit is questionable. That's a gigantic systemic issue when we are sort of drilling a inefficient, maybe just complete wrong PD regulatory apparatus around fighting that is not accurate to the medical data. That's worrying. That's truly worrying. And when we are connecting it to fighters losing out on money and careers, that's deeply concerning for just the future of the sport in a way, because I don't think there's accurate information, accurate education on PD regulation at this point in time. I think that needs to be improved both within our community, our industry, and just overall as sports. We need to address PDs from a more of a medical perspective, and we don't. And until that happens, I'm never going to be upset about fighters getting popped. That's just not me. I think the system is far more at fault, far more of an issue that we need to talk about. But I will say, to the whole like pulsing topic, I think that's fine if they use that excuse, but the sort of reactions that we got for Sean O'Malley and John Jones are completely different. Sean O'Malley got pulled off a card for apparently the same scientific reasoning and not the same substance, but sort of the same scientific reasoning why the substance isn't as much of an issue as John Jones. John Jones had the entire card moved across state lines within a week. Obviously, they're not going to do that for Sean O'Malley, who's an undercard fighter, but he's not going to fight now. Like, that to me is an issue where the reasoning is the same for both of these cases, but their outcomes are 180-degree difference. And that's an issue, and that needs to be addressed. And for Jeff Nowitzki, the drug czar to not really be upfront to talking to media that's not Joe Rogan is an issue. Because I remember, Anthony, we were at that.
Yeah, we were there. Yeah.
We had to force the UFC PR team to get us Jeff.
Yep.
Jeff didn't want to do media. It was Mark Ramundi and a few others that approached the UFC PR team to force that issue and to force him to give us a media scrum and to give us time to interview him, to question him. So, Jeff, you need to do more media that's not Joe Rogan. Otherwise, this entire system just feels wrong in a way. It feels shady. And you are in part doing that, Jeff Nowitzki, in the UFC, and that could easily be fixed.
All right. Well, man, I need you to do your part and just be prepared in case UFC 239 takes place at the Forum. Have your camera ready. Let's get this work.
There, man. I'm there.
All right. So we've gone over a little bit of time, but we do need to share some thoughts about the UFC card in Minneapolis this weekend. Everybody, we've got Joe Benavidez on this card. He is one of the fighters that we consider great that hasn't had UFC gold on his mantle. Where do you rank him among those?
He's high. I mean, he's up there with the John Fitch of the world, the Kenny Florians of the world, maybe a different generation, but he's obviously within that sort of comparison. The only difference would be is that his division was far weaker. Like 125 is a weak division. We have to be honest about that compared to 155, 145, 170, some other divisions that these other guys sort of competed in that we talk about that are the greatest fighters that never held a UFC title. Don Cerrone, another one of those guys that we should probably include in that conversation. Benavidez definitely belongs in the group. Is he the best of them? No, I think you can have that opinion, but I don't have that opinion.
Well, here, let me. I'm sorry because I looked like somebody was raising up to say something, but I just felt the need to jump in real quick here. I am of the mind that Joseph Benavidez is at the top of that heap, top three maybe, if not number one, simply for this reason. With the exception of a very controversial split decision loss to Sergio Pettis, his losses come from all-time greats, Dominic Cruz and Demetrius Johnson. And then you look at some of the names that he defeated, especially at 135, a former champion, Eddie Wineland, at a time where Eddie Wineland was a much different fighter, Miguel Torres, who we forget was an absolute murderer in the WC. He fought him shortly, just toward the tail end of that, and defeated him. Hani Yahya at a time where he was a hot prospect. Like there are a lot of very legitimate wins on his record. Ian McCall, who is one of the greater lighter weight fighters, definitely one of the greater flyweight fighters that we've ever seen. Of course, his better days as a flyweight were spent outside of the UFC, and most fans didn't get to see it. But I think that alone separates him from the Donald Cerrones and the Kenny Florians, that his losses came only from, with the exception of that one time against Sergio Pettis, the elite of the elite, when we're talking about GOAT candidates right there with Cruz and Demetrius Johnson. So, Jay, am I crazy?
No, I dig what you're putting down. I mean, he's fought 16 times in the UFC. That the loss to Pettis, the razor close split decision to Mighty Mouse in the rematch or in the first fight for the inaugural flyweight title, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then he got knocked out on the rematch. Everybody else is beaten. You know, he's beaten some of the names you mentioned. He beat Ian Mccall. He smoked Jussier Formiga with a nasty knee to the body. He tapped out Tim Elliott. I mean, he's got. I mean, the Cejudo win was questionable, but it's tough to gauge the depth of the division when he's beaten everybody besides the champion. Is the division not that great, or is it he's just the Rumble Johnson, the Alexander Gustafsson of the division, where he's the clearest of clear number twos? When you look at his losses, the two close decisions to Dominic Cruz, too close to then the other losses I already mentioned. But when I think of all-time greats to never hold a UFC title, I have to look at some of the accomplishments of the other guys in the conversation, like, say, Uriah Faber, who was a long-time WEC champion and then went 0-4 in UFC title fights. Oof, that's hard. Does that damage his legacy just from losing those title fights? Well, it means he has 4 more losses in addition to the other ones to Rivera. Dan Henderson, Pride welterweight middleweight champion, came over, tried to unify, lost to Rampage, then tried to unify with Anderson Silva, lost that too, and had some of the greatest fights ever. But does that hold up? Maybe. Cowboy Cerrone, most wins, most finishes, 0-1 in UFC title fights. Is he among the greats? Damian Maia, his losses. So there may be the tiers of the ex-champions that didn't quite make the cut. But if there's that first tier for the Hendos and the Fabers that are just the ex-champs that were this close, Benavidez is going to be right there.
You know what? I do have to say this though, because I had a similar conversation with Jason Burgos last week about this, and this is why I separate Uriah Faber and Dan Henderson out of this conversation. Uriah Faber was the WEC champion at the time where that essentially meant you were the UFC champion. You were the number one in the world at that weight class in the WEC because that was the premier place for the lighter weight fighters at the time. So in a lineal sense, he was a UFC champion if you look at it that way. Dan Henderson also won one of the early UFC tournaments. And a lot of people don't talk about that. And then additionally, the Strikeforce and Pride championships kind of rolled into the UFC family. I think that's something that would disqualify them in those conversations. And maybe I framed that wrong in saying UFC gold. Because then of course we can talk. Fedor Emelianenko obviously never won a UFC title.
Yeah, but he's fought in the UFC. Like, let's keep the conversation of like UFC fighters that have fought in the UFC that haven't won gold. But to your point about like the whole WC factor, well then Benavidez, he fought for the WC belt when it was the legit bantamweight belt, lineal belt in the sport. He lost. So
to Dominic Cruz.
Exactly.
Which is one of the great fighters.
Split decision.
And so when we talk about Uriah Faber, maybe you're trying to distinct them in how they can't be in the same conversation, but they are. Talking about UFC fighters that never won UFC gold. Uriah Faber had far more accolades outside of it. He should be, in my opinion, higher on the list of UFC fighters that never won gold because his accolades outside the UFC are far greater than Joseph Benavidez. Yeah,
that's more of a mistake in the way I asked that question because I'm talking about being a champion, but not necessarily just in the UFC in a major promotion. So if you had a belt in Pride, if you had a belt in Strikeforce, and WC obviously has a direct lineage to the UFC belt. So when you're talking about those 3 organizations, kind of hard for me to include you in the same conversation as Joseph Benavidez, but I think that's a good thing if you are excluded from that conversation with Joseph Benavidez. Jay, it looks like you got something to jump in on.
I do. I think we should really ask this question to Mr. Duffy because this seems like the ultimate criteria for his renowned HOFA. This is one of the major criteria for his haul. Is to not have a championship in a major division. So I think this is the kind of thing that Mr. Duffy should shine at. Not to put you on a pedestal or anything, Tiger.
You're not putting me on a pedestal. You're putting me on the spot. I hate you. I mean, we can't judge these people on what they did outside the UFC. I mean, Kazushi Sakuraba fought in the UFC. Is he one of the greatest fighters never to win a UFC title? Sure, but not based on what he did in the UFC. If you just go on achievement based on what they did under the actual UFC banner, Benavidez is one or two. I mean, I'd say the top five in some sort of vaguely descending order would be like Benavidez, Yoel Romero, Jacare, Maia, and Fitch. Fitch was like the gold standard for the longest time just because he went so long before he got a title shot. But if you look at the people he beat on the way to that title shot, they're very 2005 UFC fighters. You know, he's beaten up on like Luigi Fioravanti and Juan Carnero. If you look at just Benavidez's UFC ledger, like just ignore the whole WEC even, I mean, he beat top 5 flyweights every single time out, except for the 2 times he lost to DJ and the 1 time he lost to Pettis. Like, it's insane. And it doesn't even matter that the division's shallow. If you're the number 2 guy, it doesn't matter how shallow the division is. You know, the difference between a shallow division and a deep division is how good the number 25 guy is. Like, the number 25 lightweight in the world is a much better martial artist than the number 25 heavyweight in the world. But if you're the number 2 flyweight in the world, you're fighting killers every time out, no matter what. So Benavidez has an incredible legacy in that division. And he might not even be done yet. I mean, he has a win over Cejudo. You know, like who knows what'll happen. And Benavidez is not an old guy. So, yeah, Benavidez, drop dead, walk away from the sport today is, I think, at worst, the second best fighter ever not to win a UFC title based on the level of accomplishment within the UFC.
All right, so Ben obviously right because his point was so close to mine. So Ben gets the win there. All right, so gentlemen, we're gonna wrap it up by just give me your quick picks for the sleeper fight of the card on UFC Minneapolis. Matt, I'm gonna start with you.
Wait, what our pick of the sleeper fight is?
Yeah, sleeper fight.
I mean, obviously we have Benavidez Formiga, the rematch, right, on this card. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's like no one's paying attention to that right now. Maybe if Cejudo was active and not hurt, and we could talk about in the context of that winner instantly fighting Cejudo, it would be different. But that's up there. I love the main event, honestly. Like JDS Nagano is a fantastic heavyweight fight. Like I'm in love with this matchup in every conceivable way. And I hope to God JDS wins because I'm a JDS fan. I was there live when he beat Cain Velasquez, so I've always been a fan of his. And plus, I would like to see him fight Daniel Cormier to get like a revenge on Cain Velasquez. Like I would just like to see that storyline play out in some marketing. So probably my sleeper pick is Benavidez Formiga, but the main event itself is fantastic. I know that's the main event, but still watch that. Chaz Kelly on the undercard. Always like seeing Chaz Kelly fight. There's also Eric Anders on the undercard. There's a lot of people just on the undercard in fights that aren't the greatest fights.
All right. Ben, what's your sleeper pick?
As much as I try to talk about this sport on an intelligent level and appreciate it on an intelligent level, I love a heavyweight shit show as much as the next man, if not more. And I cannot wait to see Maurice Green versus Junior Albini.
That is mine as well, yes.
I mean, it used to be a hallmark of UFC matchmaking during the Joe Silva era that winners fought winners and losers fought losers. So that on some kind of basic level, the entire thing was a giant tournament trying to figure out who the best fighters were in each division. Like that was one of, the mantras that he lived by. That's kind of gone to the wayside after he's been gone. But this is the first time I can think of that a guy on the back of 3 straight losses, which would be Junior Albini, is fighting a guy who is 2-0 in the UFC in the guise of Green. Like, I can't wait to see it because Green's kind of an he's definitely an interesting dude. Any MMA fighter who, smokes cigarettes, in the 2010s, I'm all on board with that guy because you're definitely a throwback of some kind. But he's also kind of got an interesting game. He's a guy who throws up submissions from the bottom, kind of like Tim Sylvia used to before he was the champ, just kind of doing weird things to keep people honest. I can't wait to see what happens. It's going to be crazy and ridiculous and something stupid that's going to make me hit myself in the head.
Love it. All right. All right, Jay, what's your sleeper pick?
Well, I was kind of hoping to sneak the whole Green Junior Baby Albini in under there because it's a curtain jerker. Maybe people wouldn't be paying attention, but I guess I shouldn't have underestimated y'all. All right, I'm gonna go with Paul Craig and Alonzo Menafield. Menafield, he's undefeated, 8-0, 8 finishes, smoking everybody he comes on his runs into. Came from the Contender Series, but meanwhile, Paul Craig, it's sometimes impossible to beat this guy. Like I'm fairly certain, yes, he is the only fighter in UFC history to ever have hit 3 fights in a row end in the last minute of the fight in each of them. Like the Ankalaev, literal 1 second triangle choke in a fight he was getting demolished in. And then Jimmy Crute grabbed him and tweaked his arm for Kimura. And then Kennedy Nzechukwu was beating on him. He throws up a triangle choke, gets to finish, and then with less than a minute left in the fight. So I feel like that's the perfect fight for just chaos. Flip a coin, something weird's going to happen. Now, this card, when you look at this card compared to last week's card, it doesn't feel quite as strong, despite this is on big ESPN. But there are some sneaky matchups on it. But I mean, there are a lot of short notice replacements. There are a lot of Octagon newcomers. So I'm curious. There are some fighters even I have personally never watched, like Vince Murdoch, and Journey Newson. I've never seen those guys. But Dalcha from South Africa was going to be a fun debut, but Justin Ledet just pulled out of the fight, so I don't know what they're doing. But yeah, it should be an interesting time, and one I'll be able to finally watch live again.
All right, so I'm upset that Justin Ledet is off the card simply because I wanted to see his haircut. Also, I'd have to say for the legitimate just sleeper fight, when we're talking about how these fighters are going to match up and what's it going to look like and how it can play into the stakes for the division. Damian Maia versus Rocco Martin belongs in that conversation. That should be a very interesting one to watch. Martin making a lot of improvements as of late, but for the random violence, Green and Albini would have been my top pick for that. Shout out to Ben Duffy for stealing that one. But Drew Dober versus Marco Polo Reyes,
that's my brawl.
Sounds like a brawl to me. It sounds like a brawl that'll be a lot more technical than Green and Albini. And yeah, I'm there for it. I'm all there for it. So that's going to wrap it up for Off the Chain episode 2. So, gentlemen, please tell me where the good people can find you on social media. Ben, let's start with you, my man.
You can find me on social media at Benjamin Duffy. Pretty easy to find me. I am a senior editor at Sherdog.com, and you can find me on the main page of Sherdog. You just click the little features drop down, and my name is some indeterminate distance below the names of Jay and Anthony, because that's just how it rolls.
All right, Jay.
You guys can find me on Twitter at Jay Pettry, just pretty easy enough. I don't do Instagram; it's not my speed. I'll be writing up the Fight Facts pieces for this weekend's events. They should be publishing probably tomorrow, maybe Wednesday, depending on how our schedule is. Writing up Fight Facts for UFC Minneapolis as well. And as the contributing editor to Sherdog, I have my name on the little features page, and you click the drop down, and I'm on the bar somewhere. And I also write up news weekly. So if there's anything that's happening, chances are I'm writing about it.
All right. And Mr. Matt Hunter, what about you?
You can find me, Matt Hunter, MCR, all platforms, IG, Twitter, doesn't matter, Matt Hunter, MCR. You can find me at Mixed Combat Radio, YouTube channel, podcast, find it anywhere, Patreon, all that fun stuff. And I do obviously do videographing and photography for Sherdog whenever they call upon me in the LA area. Mike, call me more often, please. That'd be fun. Do that.
He's saying, right. Cut that check, Mike.
All right, so I'm Ant Walker. You can find me on Twitter at Ant Walker MMA. That's my Instagram name as well, although I never really post anything to it. Check it out anyway. And yeah, Good, Bad, and the Ugly, the post-fight column, Ask Ant, the mailbag column, get those questions in. And the Trenches live chat on the Sherdog.com YouTube page Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific with the homie Captain Credential, Jason Burgos. So I'm Ant Walker. He's Ben Duffy. He's Jay Pettry. He's Matt Hunter. And that's it. So you know what you got to do. You got to stay beautiful. You got to stay positive. And the most important part of it all, you got to stay sexy. I will see you when I see you. Peace.